I'm pregnant with your husband's child, and he's already signed the house over to me, my maid, Elena, said as she handed me a folded legal document. My breath caught as I looked at the signature on the bottom of the page. It was undeniably my husband's messy, slanted handwriting. Would you walk away quietly to save your dignity? Or would you stay to burn down the life of the man who promised you forever, just to see if he'd crawl? The air in our Greenwich estate felt cold, despite the late July heat. I stared at Elena. She wasn't wearing her black and white uniform. She was wearing my favorite silk robe, the one I'd misplaced 3 weeks ago. It was a soft peach color that looked expensive against her skin. That was the first glitch. I'd lost that earring months ago, and here it was, sitting on the coaster next to her steaming herbal tea. "Caleb's at the firm," Elena said, her voice smooth and lacking any hint of guilt. "He didn't want to be the one to tell you. He's too soft for that. But the paperwork is filed. You have 48 hours to pack your things." I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice. I looked past her at the hallway mirror. I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Pale, wide-eyed, and suddenly homeless in her own mansion. I had spent 10 years building this life. I had used my father's inheritance to help Caleb start his law practice. Every piece of art on these walls was chosen by me. Every rug was flown in from overseas. And now, a woman who had been scrubbing my floors for 6 months was telling me it was hers. 48 hours? I whispered. "He wants a fresh start for the baby," she said, resting her hand on her stomach. As she moved her hand, I noticed something odd. Elena always had bitten, short nails, the nails of someone who worked with her hands. But today they were long, manicured, and painted a soft bridal white. It was a small detail, but it didn't fit the image of a woman who had been scrubbing my floors just yesterday. She wasn't just claiming his child, she was claiming my identity. "I need to hear it from him," I said, my voice steadying. "He won't take your calls, Savannah," she replied. She walked toward the kitchen, her heels clicking on the hardwood, heels that sounded exactly like the ones I bought her for our anniversary last year. She wasn't just in my house, she was in my skin. I walked to the mudroom, my mind spinning. I needed my car keys. I reached into the decorative bowl where we kept the spares, but my hand hit something cold and metallic instead of the leather key fob. It was a camera lens cap, a professional one. Neither Caleb nor I owned a high-end camera. Why was there a camera lens cap in our mudroom? Was someone watching us, or was Elena documenting her victory? I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how little I knew about the woman who had lived under my roof. I looked back at the kitchen. Elena was humming a song I'd never heard, a slow, melodic tune that felt haunting in the quiet house. She looked too comfortable, too staged. I grabbed my purse and headed for the garage, but as I passed the laundry room, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed open the heavy oak door. Inside, on the folding table, sat a stack of mail that hadn't been sorted. On top was a postcard addressed to the Miller family. But we weren't the Millers, we were the Whitakers. I picked up the postcard. It was a save the date for an anniversary party. I turned it over, expecting to see a local address. Instead, it was from a small town in Georgia, a town Caleb had never mentioned, a town where he supposedly had no ties. I stood in the laundry room, the smell of detergent filling my nose, but I felt like I was suffocating. If Elena was telling the truth, my marriage was a lie. But if she was lying, the truth was much more dangerous. I looked at the postcard again. The names Caleb and Elena were printed in elegant script. I flipped the postcard one last time. It wasn't an invitation for a future party. It was a thank you note for a wedding anniversary party for Caleb and Elena Miller, dated 3 years ago. 3 years. Caleb and I had been married for 5. If this postcard was real, my husband had a second identity, a second name, and a second wife long before Elena ever stepped foot in our house as a maid. My head throbbed. I thought about all the business trips to Atlanta, all the late nights at the office where he didn't answer his phone. I drove to Caleb's law firm in downtown Stamford. The drive felt like a blur of gray highway and flashing brake lights. My heart was a drum in my chest. I stared at the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I arrived at the sleek glass tower, the receptionist, a woman named Megan, who had known me for years, wouldn't look me in the eye. She stared at her computer screen as if it held the secrets of the universe. "He's in a meeting, Mrs. Whitaker," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Is he?" I asked, walking past her toward his corner office. I didn't wait for her to buzz him. I didn't care about decorum anymore. I threw the door open. Caleb wasn't in a meeting. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a laptop screen. When he saw me, he didn't look surprised. He didn't jump. He looked tired, like a man who had been expecting a ghost to walk through his door. He closed the laptop instantly, the clicking sound loud in the silent room. "Savannah," he said, "you shouldn't be here." "Who is Caleb Miller?" I threw the postcard onto his desk. It landed face up, the names mocking us both. Caleb sighed. He rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture he only did when he was truly stressed. "It's a long story. I was going to tell you when the timing was right. Elena, she's not who you think she is." "She told me she's pregnant, Caleb. She showed me the deed to our house. She's wearing my clothes and drinking my tea." "She's my sister, Savannah," Caleb said. "She's troubled, very troubled. The Miller name was our mother's maiden name. She used it to get a credit line because her own name is blacklisted. She's had legal trouble in the South. I hired her as a maid to keep an eye on her, to keep her off the streets. The pregnancy? She's delusional. She's had a breakdown. She thinks she's me. She thinks she's you." I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made me sick. It was a logical explanation. Caleb's mother had been a difficult woman. It made sense he would have a sister he wanted to hide. So, the house? The signature on that deed? "A forgery," he said, standing up and walking toward me. "She's been stealing my stationery from the home office." "I was trying to protect her, Savannah. I didn't want to worry you with my family's mess, but it's gone too far. I've already contacted a private clinic to get her the help she needs. Go home, honey. I'll have the police and a medical team remove her quietly this evening. Just stay in the guest room until I get there." He walked around the desk and hugged me. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that my life was a total sham. But as my head rested on his shoulder, I smelled it. My breath caught. He didn't smell like his usual expensive cedarwood cologne. He smelled like the herbal tea Elena had been drinking. It wasn't just a faint scent. It was as if he'd been bathed in it. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he whispered into my hair. I left the office, pretending to be the comforted, naive wife. I even squeezed his hand before I walked out. But as I walked to the elevator, I didn't press the button for the lobby. I waited until the doors closed, then I pressed the button for the basement, the records room where the firm kept their physical backups. My best friend Claire worked in firm compliance. She had given me her login password months ago when I needed to help her with some data entry for a charity event. I slipped into the dark, chilled room and pulled up Caleb's private billable hours and expense reports. He hadn't been working on mergers for the last 6 months. He had been funneling massive amounts of money into a private trust called the Miller Legacy. And the beneficiary wasn't a troubled sister, it was a legal spouse. I scrolled further. The trust wasn't just holding cash, it held the title to a house in Georgia, the same house pictured on the postcard. And the purchase date? 2 weeks after our 3rd anniversary. While I was planning a vacation to Maui, he was buying a house for someone else. I scrolled down to the trust's digital signature file. There was a photo attached for identification purposes. It was Elena, dressed in a stunning white lace gown, standing next to Caleb in front of a small courthouse. They were both radiant, and in her hand, she was holding the same emerald earring I had lost months ago. The sister story was a lie. The breakdown was a lie. They were working together to bleed me dry. My family's money had built Caleb's firm. My inheritance had bought the Greenwich estate. He wasn't just cheating, he was colonizing my life to fund his other one. I realized the trap they were setting. If they could convince the world I was the one having a breakdown, they could take everything through a fit for duty clause in our prenup. The maid was the legitimate wife in the eyes of another state, and I was the other woman who provided the funding. I drove back to the house, but I didn't park in the driveway. I parked a block away and walked through the woods at the edge of the property. I went straight to the guest house above the garage. I knew Elena kept her maid supplies there, but I also knew Caleb kept his private files in the small office attached to it. I broke the lock on the back window with a garden spade I found in the shed. The room didn't look like a maid's quarters. It looked like a command center. There were folders on the desk, folders on me. My daily schedule was mapped out in 15-minute increments. My medical records were spread out with certain medications circled in red ink. Medications I didn't take, but that Caleb had been picking up from the pharmacy in my name. Elena wasn't just his wife. She was his legal partner in a firm that didn't exist. They weren't just taking my house, they were framing me for massive insurance fraud. They had been moving money from the firm into my personal accounts, then out again, making it look like I was laundering funds while Caleb tried to save me. "You think you're so smart," I whispered to the empty room. I found a professional camera under the bed, the one the lens cap belonged to. I turned it on. It was full of photos of me, but they were edited. They were photos of me at bars I'd never visited, looking disheveled and drunk with men I'd never met. They were creating a portfolio of instability to use in a divorce. They were going to strip me of my reputation before they stripped me of my home. I could call the police right now, but with the evidence Caleb had planted, I might be the one in handcuffs. No. I had to be the villain they thought I was. I had to outmanipulate the manipulators. Is it wrong to ruin a man's entire career if he's already spent years slowly erasing your existence? I sat at the desk in the guest house and began to type. I used Caleb's firm login on his laptop, which he'd left docked. I didn't delete the Miller Legacy Trust. I expanded it. I made it look like the most obvious paper trail in history. I linked the trust to a series of offshore accounts Caleb had been using for his actual high-profile clients. If Caleb wanted to be Caleb Miller, he could be. But Caleb Miller was about to become the primary suspect in the largest embezzlement case in the state's history. I didn't have to steal his money. I just had to make sure the people he stole it from knew where it was. I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was Caleb. I watched from the guest house window as he walked into the main house, his arm around Elena. They weren't hiding it anymore. I hurried back to the main house through the back entrance. I walked into the kitchen just as they were standing together by the island, whispering and looking over a set of floor plans for the renovations they wanted to make to my house. "Savannah, I thought you were upstairs resting," Caleb said, his face shifting instantly back to the concerned husband mask. He actually managed to look worried. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice trembling slightly, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline of the trap. "Caleb, I think I'm ready to sign the papers. If you want a divorce, I won't fight you. I just want peace. I can't live like this anymore." Elena smirked. She didn't even try to hide it. She poured herself a glass of my most expensive wine and took a sip. "It's the right choice, Savannah, for everyone's sake." Caleb pulled a pen from his pocket, the gold fountain pen I'd given him for his birthday, and handed it to me along with a stack of documents. "It's all standard, honey. Just sign the last page." Caleb and Elena exchanged a look of pure, ugly triumph. I leaned over the counter and pressed the pen to the paper. But I wasn't signing a divorce settlement. I was signing a formal whistleblower disclosure that I had already uploaded to the firm's server, and the hard copy I was signing was actually a letter to the district attorney. The next morning, the house was silent. The sun moved across the hardwood floors, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. I was sitting in the same chair where Elena had sat when she gave me the news 48 hours ago. I had my coffee, I had my dignity, and I had the remote for the security gates. Caleb walked down the stairs, looking refreshed, wearing a suit I'd bought him. Elena followed him, wearing another one of my dresses, a deep navy blue one this time. "The movers will be here at noon," Caleb said, checking his watch. "I've arranged a condo for you in the city, Savannah. It's small, but it's for the best until you get back on your feet." "Actually, Caleb," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, "I think the movers are going to be busy with your things. Or rather, the feds will be." Caleb laughed, a short, condescending sound. "What are you talking about? You signed the papers. It's over." "I signed a document, yes," I said, "but not the one you gave me. I swapped the folders while you two were celebrating in the kitchen last night. You signed a full disclosure of the Miller Legacy Trust as part of your firm's annual audit. Since you were so eager to get my signature, you didn't even notice I'd slipped your signature page into a different stack." Caleb's smile faltered. He reached for the folders on the counter, but I swiped them away. "And Elena," I said, turning to her, "I found your wedding photos, the ones from Georgia. I sent those to the Board of Ethics and the local police in your hometown, where you're still wanted for identity theft. Turns out, practicing law under a fake identity while married to two people at once is a bit of a problem for the Bar Association." Caleb's face went pale. He stared at the floor, his chest heaving. "You did what?" Elena stepped forward, her maid persona completely gone, her eyes flashing with a cold, sharp rage. "And the insurance fraud?" I continued. "I redirected the evidence you planted. The accounts you used to frame me, I showed the forensic accountants exactly where the IP addresses originated. Hint, they all lead back to your dock in the guest house." The doorbell rang. It wasn't the rhythmic chime of a visitor, it was the heavy, insistent thud of authority. It wasn't the movers. It was the senior partners from Caleb's firm, accompanied by two men in dark suits who carried the heavy weight of the federal government. They didn't look like they were there to talk. They looked like they were there to collect. "Savannah, wait!" Caleb pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I did it for us. I wanted to build a legacy that was ours, not just your father's." "You did it for the Miller family, Caleb, and I'm a Whitaker. You should have remembered whose name is on the deed to this land." I watched as they were escorted out. There was no screaming, there was no sobbing. There was only the sound of Caleb's expensive shoes scuffing against the gravel driveway as he was led to a black sedan he no longer owned. He wasn't being arrested for violence. He was being taken in for questioning regarding $20 million in missing client funds that I conveniently had found for the authorities. Elena followed, her head down, her peach robe, my robe, flapping in the wind. I walked back into the kitchen. I looked at the herbal tea. I poured it down the sink, watching the dark liquid disappear. I took the herbal postcard and tossed it into the trash can, right on top of the manicured, fake bridal nails Elena had lost in her rush to leave. I sat down at the table, the same place where the betrayal began, and finally, for the first time in years, I could hear myself breathe.